Brush tool. Hi guys, today we are going to talk about the brush tool, and before we start to study it, I would like to show you some examples of its application, since the capabilities of this tool are actually unique. You can create works that will be little distinguishable from real painting, although it will be digital painting, and you can create both very realistic and modern images, and the brush will be useful everywhere. And of course, there are a huge number of effects, such as these glares, and the sparkling snow here, various stars, and much more that can be created with the help of a brush. And let's move on to practice. Of course, we have already used the brush tool. It is almost impossible to get around it, because it is very closely connected with the work of many tools. But now we'll talk about its settings in more detail. The brush tool is invoked with B letter, and you can see that there are other tools here. We'll also talk about them. So, go to the upper menu of the brush tool. All of that is already familiar to you. Here we can adjust the size of the brush and its hardness, and here below we will see the brushes that we have downloaded to the computer. If we want to see them, let's say in this mode, then we move the slider to the left, but we can enlarge the image by moving the slider very much to the right, and this will give us the opportunity to have a good look at what the brush stroke will look like, how it will look in reality when we need to draw with it. Here I have number of brushes. Let's click on the gear here. Well, what is important for us to know here? Right now, for example, I have a tick near a brush stroke. This implies what we see here in the left window. We can see how the brush will look like if we just click here. For example, I can take a snowflake brush. I get a snowflake like this. That's it. And if I start drawing, then I get this kind of brush stroke on snowflakes. So, let's go back to the same menu. So, we can check the box so that the brush stroke is visible. But we can also remove it if we don't need it. And we can leave only the tip. If we want, for example, to choose some number of snowflakes, I am now increasing this parameter for viewing in order to see as clearly as possible what the tip of the brush looks like. That's it. When you first open this panel, you have brushes loaded by default. And in early versions, there are also names of additional sets that you can download at your discretion. In the new version, you can simply select legacy brushes. Select here and agree that you want to restore a set of legacy brushes. In fact, I find these legacy brushes very interesting and useful, and I recommend installing them anyway, because it is good. Let's take a closer look at these sets. And look, here I have chosen to install legacy brushes, and I have them installed. If I click on this arrow now, then I'll see legacy brushes. Well, here, for example, nature brushes. Anyway, there were such beautiful brushes here somewhere. I wanted to show it to you. Probably it is special effects set. Yes, that's it. Look, the brushes are in the shape of a butterfly, for example, or in the form of a flower, like this. Well, in general, there are a lot of quite interesting brushes that can be useful to you to create a completely different texture of your brush stroke and create a variety of special effects. Well, you can also create brushes yourself. So, let's talk now in more detail about how you can install brushes on your computer and download them from third-party sources, from the internet for example, and how you can create your own brush. We'll go to the additional section and select brushes. There are many different brushes listed here, among which you can choose the ones you like. Well, let's choose for example nature. Well, let's choose some other brushes that will allow us, for example, to create such leaves. Look at the preview of these brushes. This how it will look like. And for example, if you want to create a leaf fall effect, then these brushes are quite suitable for you. Then you choose to download leaves and trees for Photoshop. By the way, there are instructions for installing them here if you suddenly forget something. Well, of course, I will tell you about it now. So, I downloaded. We go back to Photoshop. Go to the brushes menu and select import brushes or download brushes in early versions. Then select the folder where we have downloaded these brushes. It can be in principle any folder. Brushes are always with the ABR resolution. Select it and click upload. So look at what we got. Look, I have a leaves and trees folder. And let's look at the leaves. There are a lot of them. Let's choose one of them, this one for example, and see how it will work. I choose the green color in advance. Let's increase the brush size. And look what a beautiful leaf we have. And now let's try to create a brush yourself. After all, sometimes we need such elements that we can use in our work quite regularly. Or for example, we need such a scattering of some elements in one project. Let's see how it can be done. And since we're already talking about the brush, let's do Chinese painting. Here we have such an image. I would like to edit a watercolor butterfly, or maybe a few butterflies. And I need a brush with a butterfly. I am taking an image of a butterfly now. I have a butterfly on a transparent background, and select Define Brush Preset. After that, the software offers me to give this brush a name. That's the butterfly one. Okay, and let's see. Of course, my brush immediately appeared here by default as the last brush. That's it. And now I have it at the very bottom. Scroll it and see that this brush is at the very bottom. And this number, it means the brush size that I created. That is, here I have. Let's go back to our painting. We will create a butterfly on a new layer. Created. And now I'm just thinking where to put this butterfly. Well, of course, we'll reduce the size. And let's click, for example, here. And look what a beautiful butterfly I got. I want to say that, of course, the created brush, it will not transmit the colors that you had. We had a butterfly with blue wings, but as a brush, it will get the color that we have chosen. It will not have any blue wings separately, for example, but of course, the tone will be preserved. And the butterfly will be in gradation of the same color that you have chosen. We can reduce the opacity because our dragonfly is quite transparent. And we can move this butterfly with the help of a moving tool. With the help of a free transform, we can somehow rotate it. For example, make it fly in a different way. And in the next lesson, we will see how it will be possible to make a scattering of these butterflies at the same time with one movement of the brush. If we wanted there to be a lot of them, for example, well, not necessarily butterflies, but any elements that make up our brush. Well, let's talk a little more about the settings. Let's look at the brush panel, and here at the top you can see the brushes that I used last. Click on the gear, select Show Recent Brushes, and now you can see that our butterfly is in the reduced size. It is my last brush. But now I want to talk to you about the preset manager. And for example, you would like to share this butterfly with someone else. For example, someone saw this butterfly in your work and said, please give me this brush. Then we'll go into the preset manager, select our butterfly and click Save. Then we assign the name for butterfly and click Save. And after that, you can send your butterfly by mail or something else, like an ordinary file. That's how convenient it is. In addition, you can also delete, save and upload some files. For example, if you need to delete a certain number of files, you select them. Well, for example, holding down Ctrl or Shift. Well, for example, I don't need these files. I can click Delete, and it will be deleted. Or for example, I want to rename some file. That is, I select it. I can give this brush some kind of name. I will not do this. Download the brushes just as we did before. That is, select the folder from where we'll download all this, and more. And in this panel, you can create groups from brushes. When you have created several brushes of a certain theme that are somehow combined in meaning. Well, let's say I had a few butterflies. I could select them and create a new group. For example, I want to create a group of these leaves. Here I have allocated a certain number of leaves by pressing Shift, and I can create a group of leaves there. And look, it has become a separate group for me. That is, in future it will be easier for me to find them and work with them somehow else. Just like in the upper panel, we can customize the way we display them. For example, large thumbnails, like this, or the miniature or the stroke. Well, that is, you can view all this here and choose the display method that will be most suitable for you. Let's close the preset manager, and once again, we'll come back here again. Look, Import brushes means to install brushes from third-party sources. Export selected brushes is when we want to send our brush somewhere else. Well, if we click here now, then we'll have just the opportunity to save the last brush that we worked on. And there are even more brushes. If you click on this menu option, then you'll have the opportunity to download the updated brushes that Adobe offers. Also note that each brush has a name written at the bottom. And if you suddenly find yourself guided by it, then it may be useful to you. But if it bothers you somehow, you can disable it by removing the tick near the brush name. You can also rename and make a new group. Well, that is about the same thing that we did earlier. Of course, these are not all brush settings. And now let's talk about homework. As a homework assignment, you'll need to create a brush from this butterfly and add this butterfly to this drawing. In addition, I recommend that you try to save the brush so that you can send it someone. Well, also try to download brushes from the internet. In general, I must say that brushes are always useful. The more brushes you have, the more interesting it will be for you to work. We continue to study a wonderful brush tool and its settings. Last time we already mentioned that we can use the blending mode when using a brush. Let's see how it works and how it can be applied. I take an ordinary soft brush and I will try to make the hair structure more expressive. We'll also need to take a color sample from the curls. And look, now the brush tool is active. Here you see its designation, but when working with this tool, it is very often necessary to take some color samples. I want to take a color sample here and then immediately return to the brush tool. To do this, you can hold down Alt. We will have an eyedropper icon. Then we click on the right place. Take a color sample and release the Alt key. This is the easiest and most convenient way to do it. And now I'll make layers on my hair lighter. To begin with, let's figure out what the principle of our work will be and create a new layer for this. I set Lighten Blending mode. And now I'm going to draw a little on the new layer. Look, I'm painting some area on a new layer. But we don't see the effect that we would see if we applied the blending mode to the layer itself. Take a look how the image changes right away if we set Color Dodge mode. The fact is that when using this mode for a brush, it begins to be noticeable only when we start drawing something already on top of what we have. Look, the more brush strokes I added, the lighter they become. And if I change the mode multiply now, on the contrary, it will become darker. But if I draw somewhere in the usual place, in a place where there is nothing yet, then it will just be the usual foreground color. That's how it works. But let's move on to practice. So, we'll remove this layer. We'll duplicate the layer with the girl, just in case, and get started. I'll make the brush a little smaller in the settings. Set the lighten mode and see what happens. Now, if I just draw on here now, it looks too active. Therefore, by pressing Ctrl plus Z, I go back and reduce the level of opacity, like that. And look, I'm drawing on here, and the effect becomes much more delicate. And you can reduce the size of the brush a little more. You can right-click and reduce the size in the drop-down window. That's it. You can use square brackets, or you can do it like this, as I have done now. And now I work on individual hairs to make them lighter and more textured. You can periodically edit a level of opacity in those areas where you want the glare to be more active, so you can make it more active. Of course, you can also do it by changing the blending mode of the layer itself, but you can do it this way. It depends on which way will seem more convenient to you. So we can even compare. That's what we had, that's what we have now. And we can edit shadows as well. To do this, we hold down Alt again, take an eyedropper and a color sample. Let's switch to multiply mode. Let's increase the brush size a little and work with the shadows where it is possible. Something like that. So here you can still make the shadow deeper. Let's compare what we had and what we have now. In the same way, we can edit some shades to the hair if necessary. We can take, let's say, red color and set the blending mode for example, overlay. And look, I'm drawing on the edge of our hair, and it get a red hue, like that. Let's compare. This is what we had, and this is what we have now. Well, you can edit a little makeup in the same way. I reduce the brush size again. Go to the eyes, press Alt and take a color sample. I switch to the multiply mode and make a very transparent brush, so as not to overdo it. And I'll edit some expressive shadows over the eyes, just like that. You can also work on your lips a little bit, so it is a warmer shade, for example. Well, look, let's compare the photo before and after. In just a couple of minutes, you can make a photo more expressive by adding the necessary accents to it. The same method allows you to make the fabric and the folds on it more expressive. If you emphasize the glares and dark places in the right way, then you'll make the trousers more luminous and expressive. This is what it looks like when you zoom in. And now let's explore such modes as opacity and flow. Let's see how it differs on the example of this image of the kitty. We'll edit a background. We'll draw on a new layer. It will be more convenient. And let's set the opacity 100, the flow 100, and the color sample from the fur of the kitty. So, look, here I have an opacity of 100 and the flow of 100. I'm drawing a line, and our line is like that. Now let's set the opacity of 50. Let's draw another line like that. Let's set the opacity of 25 and also draw a line. And now let's go to the flow mode and see what will change if we change this parameter. Let's return the opacity to 100% and draw a line with 100% flow as well. So flow of 50 and flow of 25. As you can see, nothing really changes if we don't adjust the opacity. So what's the difference then? Let's set the opacity of 50%. And look, I'm painting older without releasing the mouse button. I release it now. And if I draw from above, then I have an overlay. Those strokes that were made before are shown through new strokes. And now let's set 100% opacity and make 50% flow. If I draw like this without taking off the mouse button and then draw again from above, releasing the mouse button, I will have no overlap. That is, you can take off the mouse button as many times as you want and continue your work. But nothing that we have seen before doesn't happen. But why do we need flow? After all, we could just paint with a brush and release it as much as we want. No, it gives us a small opportunity to regulate what we used to call transparency. And at the same time, we're able to release the mouse button at a certain number of times and don't hold it down all the time. And so, we won't have these overlays of strokes that occur when opacity is used. I'm drawing more shadows with a soft brush on the new layer above the layer with the cat and apply the multiply mode. That is, I added a little shadow on the back. And now I will take another sample of a light color and make the background a little more diverse by adding such bright spots to it. I do it also on the new layer, so I can adjust its opacity. Something like this. Look, when my strokes are applied preciously transparent, then the border between them is still visible. Look, I'm doing one stroke and another one on top, and here is the border or their intersection. It is visible when I work with opacity, but if I do the same thing with flow, then I won't have such boundaries. Well, here I have finished our background. I don't know if I should leave these shadows. Look, I don't know how to do it better. I have slightly modified the background with a white brush, created another layer above the layer with a kitty, and now I will edit such white glares with short clicks, and this is what we got. Of course, you can do much better here if you work longer, but the main task of this work is that you practice to work with the brush tool. I had a brush called a charcoal shape, but it is absolutely not necessary to use this particular brush. You can take any other one, or even use several brushes. That is, there is just full scope for your creativity. And now let's look at the mod, which is called an airbrush. The button for this mod is located here. It is called to enable airbrush effects. We have it turned on now, and I have taken the usual simplest soft brush and, for example, point the cursor. I press the mouse button and I get this kind of brush mark, and I keep holding the left mouse button. Well, I don't have anything else going on. And now let's turn on the airbrush mode and do the same. I point the cursor somewhere, press the mouse button and keep holding. And look how this brush is spreading out. I get such a blur, similar to the blur that occurs when using an airbrush. I can see these transitions that occur when applying a brush. And you can also choose the multiply mode of the layer itself. And for example, reduce its opacity even more. And I get this kind of background for this kitty with this tool. You can also take another color and edit it on a new layer in multiply mode. I will do things like this. Some kind of circles. You can also create a batch effect if you want to. That's the romantic background I got for this kitty. And I also want to tell you about a couple of settings that the pad owners can use. The first setup is here, and the second one is here. They determine the pressure sensitivity. And so let's turn them on and see what happens. I have the same brush installed that I had, and I take the pad. So before that I drew with the mouse, and now with the stylus. And look, I'm reducing the pressure at the end of drawing, and my tips turns out to be so sharp. When drawing with the mouse, the strokes turns out to be the same along its entire length. This is how my stroke changes depending on how hard I press on the stylus. Here, for example, is what a mouse stroke looks like, and here is how the stroke looks like with a change in the level of pressure. Thus, the strokes are much more lively. So I choose opacity now, opacity sensitivity, and that's what I got. As you can see, they turn out to be much more lively, and just like that you can draw the fur of a cat. But we'll not dwell on this in so much detail. Firstly, because not everyone has pads after all. Well, and secondly, because it will be a completely endless lesson. And if you're interested in such techniques, then there are a lot of free lessons on this topic. And let's get to the homework. The first task will be to create glares on the girl's hair. The second task will be to create a background for this grey cat with the brush tool and its traditional settings, opacity and flow. Well, the third task will be to create a background for a cat with an airbrush. But of course, that's not all I wanted to tell you about the brush tool. Continue to talk about the settings of the brush tool and discuss in detail a special brush palette. This palette is located in the top menu, and it can be opened by clicking this button or just pressing F5. So click the palette has opened. Let's see what we can do in it. First of all, of course, we can adjust the size of the brush. Now I have such a small brush, and I can set, for example, of 100 pixels. Well, this is quite an obvious setup. Here we also see all the brushes that we have, and we can choose the brush that we're interested in. I'm going to choose a brush in the shape I have opened it recently, so I have it right here in the top row. And let's move on to the settings of this brush. Look, I hope you can now see the silhouette of this brush. If I click on it now, then I'll have like this. But if I press the left mouse button and I just draw like this, then I'll get this line. That is, by default, we get a solid line. It is determined just by the value called spacing. The larger this distance is, the larger the spacing is, the greater the distance between the two tips we will have. Let's set it. Take a look at the preview below. You can immediately see approximately how it will look. That is, let's reduce the spacing a bit. And look, I'm drawing without releasing the mouse button, and I get like this. And if I set the spacing to the minimum value, then it would be such a line. Let's look at our settings. Right now, by default, looks like this. This brush looks the way as it was originally created. Well, what should we do if we want to mirror the image? Then we tick flip X, like this. And if we put a check mark to flip Y, then it will be like this. Thus, we can change the display format of our brush. But that's not all. We can change the rotation angle. For example, you can pull this arrow. At the same time, the angle position changes. Now let's rotate it. We can set the angle in this window too, or we can set it like this. And by the way, changes also occur at the bottom of the preview. Here, let's set some kind of angle so that it is clearly visible. But you can change not only the angle, but also the shape of the brush itself. We can just squeeze in this way, and we'll have something like this. I suggest you practice with these settings yourself. using some non-symmetrical brush. For example, you can take a butterfly brush that we created, and we have many other interesting settings. And let's look at them too. So, I'm going to take a brush in the shape of a snowflake, probably this one. Here is a snowflake. I will take it. There will be this brush in the appendix to this lesson. But you can also download other snowflakes from the internet and use them. I want to draw your attention to the fact that the brush I took, it has already been reduced by me. That is, the size is not the original one. But if I want to return it to its maximum, the way it was created, then I can choose to restore the original size in the brushes tab. So let's say I click. That is, in fact, it was not reduced by me, but increased. Well, let's make the size that will be convenient for us. But you can of course set some other size. And we move on to their interesting settings. We have already looked at the brush tip shape, and let's look at the shape dynamics. Go to the section, we open its settings. And look, at the bottom you now see the stroke that we would have got by default. I am drawing with this brush. I have such a lazy stroke, consisting of snowflakes. I would say so, but it may not necessarily be so boring. For example, if we move the size slider, then the snowflakes in this stroke will not be the same, but will differ in size. Some will be larger, some will be smaller. Right now you see a preview of the stroke, which we will have in this case. At the same time, we have the smallest snowflakes, so it can be adjusted in size. Take a look at this stroke. That is, when I'm starting drawing, the snowflakes are pretty big, and when I finish, it becomes small. Here again, that is, it is obvious that the very first snowflake and the very last one are very different. But if we don't want the size to be so large, we can set the minimum size of the smallest snowflake in such a way that suits us. Look, I will slightly reduce the size of the brush to make it clear. Look here, these are the jitter I get in this case. There is also angle jitter. Angle jitter shows how the snowflakes rotate relative to their center. This now clearly visible in the lower preview. That is, if I had not symmetrical snowflake, or for example autumn leaves, fallen leaves can be created this way. So then it would each fall at their own angle, which can also look quite interesting. Let's see roundness jitter. So let's edit it now, and you can see that some snowflakes, it become kind of flat. Look, I'm clicking separately now. You see, we have the effect of fallen snowflakes. Each new snowflake flies at its own angle. We also have parameters here that have an exclamation mark in front of them. This means that these options can only be activated if you have a path. And if you go here, then you can guess what it means. We will not discuss it in detail. If you have a path, I think you can easily study all this yourself. Moreover, the names of the parameters are clear. The same applies to these two parameters too. That is, in this case, in addition to the settings that are in the software, your pen will also respond to the level of pressure and to the angle at which you are leading your hand. So let's bring the snowflakes back. I will cancel some of the parameters. I will leave only the size jitter and the minimum diameter. So all the time I look at the lower previews to check how it looks like. I won't need the roundness jitter either in this exercise. So I will leave it all with these settings. And we move on to the next parameter, which is called scattering. This is probably one of the most obvious options, because everything is very clearly visible here. Look, now I'm moving the scatter slider and see what happens. Our snowflakes scatter as if the wind blew on them. But the further I move the slider, the further it scatters. By the way, it's always better to draw such things on a new clean layer. Look how the snowflakes are flying away from me. That's what I get in this case. I just move the mouse cursor and I get the effect of snowfall. Let's see how this parameter will work if we also turn on both axes. So, both axes. And look. So, this is not very noticeable, but in fact, this parameter increases the level of their dispersion, both on the x-axis and on the y and on the y-axis. Let's move on to the count parameter. Let's make our snowflakes smaller in order to better see what is happening. So, this is the snowflake I have. Look, when the count parameter is turned off, it is distributed this way. And now I will turn on this parameter. I removed snowflakes. And look, the higher the value of the count, the more dense our snowfall turns out. Look here, how immediately everything became snow colored. If you do even more, you'll have such a solid background of snowflakes. But if we added count jitter to this parameter, then the snow will have a different density. Somewhere we will have fewer snowflakes, somewhere more. Well, for example, let's put it like this. Well, you see, there are some gaps, but it can all be regulated. That is, let's cancel it anyway. We will not change anything here to create the composition which we want. You can additionally adjust all these options, but it still very much depends on the characteristics of your part, and on each part it will be reflected a little differently, because each part has different technical capabilities, different pressure and tilt sensitivity. I'll turn off the count jitter and the count, and leave only the scatter of 1000%, which will give us such an effect. Now we will not talk about texture and dual brush. We will look at them using example of the following exercise. And now we will discuss the color dynamics. And for this I will need to take the second color, because we will have the color of snowflakes change from one color to another. And I will put a blue shade here. I choose this blue color. And let's see how color dynamics works. Go to this parameter. I have temporarily disabled the scattering parameter. Then I will turn it on again. Let's see how color dynamics works. It is implied that when this parameter is enabled, we use not only the foreground color, but also the background color. I have now set the maximum foreground background jitter, and let's see what we will get. So I take the brush, hold the left mouse button above, and make a stroke. Here I have the first stroke, the second, the third, the fourth. As you can see, each new stroke has a different color. That is, the color changes from stroke to stroke. And now let's tick apply per tip and do the same. Look, the color is now changing inside the stroke. Each new snowflake is of a different color, and we have such flow of color from white to blue. And now let's add hue jitter to this parameter. So let's put, for example, 75. And look, new completely unexpected colors are being added. The bigger this jitter is, the brighter the colors we get. And if it is insignificant, then we get something like this. Let's add this parameter to 0 and look at the saturation jitter. We take our snowflake. Here is our usual stroke. And now let's make a saturation jitter. Look, I think everything is visible. And there is nothing to say. We return the saturation jitter as it was before. And let's take our main stroke again. And look what will happen if we turn on the brightness jitter. Well, for example, something like this. When do even more, and we will have very bright snowflakes. By the way, you can still combine all these parameters with the brush blending modes. There will be many more different options. We return the brightness parameters as it was before. And now let's see the purity. Look, if we set the purity to the lowest value, then we'll get just white snowflakes. In the next lesson, we'll look at other settings of the brush tool. And it was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time.